Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining me so bright and early on a Saturday morning. I appreciate all of you taking the time this morning to come together and talk about this topic of clinical engineering supply chain. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself first, just to kick things off. Can everybody hear me? Are we okay? Okay. So currently I am the Senior Director of Client Solutions at PartsSource, and my responsibility is working with hospitals and service organizations and any of our customers to basically identify areas of cost savings opportunity and productivity savings as it pertains to their parts and service procurement. So we implement strategic programs and partner with customers to do that. And previous to this, in my last life, I've been with PartsSource about a year, and previous to this, I worked for a large IDN in Minnesota, Allina Health, 11 hospital system based out of Minnesota, and I led the operations group there and a group of technicians as well. So this is a subject matter that is near and dear to my heart because it's what I used to live each and every day, and it's what I live in my new position as well. So I'm excited to be here and talk with you all about this subject. So today, if I can figure out how to. Try it that way. Okay. Today we're going to spend a little time just setting the context of the current state of healthcare as it pertains to really the initiatives that are out there for cost savings as well as increasing the quality of care. And we're also going to talk about what role clinical engineering groups and healthcare technology management groups can play in that, what role we have to play, and also talk through some examples where we have some examples of HTM or ACE groups that have actually executed on some of these strategies and brought that value to their organization. So that's really where we're going to focus attention today. And feel free to stop me and ask questions at any time, or if you have a story or something you'd like to share, more than happy to stop and just chat as well. So, now more than ever, the healthcare industry is really an industry in crisis. And I think it's a time when we have a real significant opportunity as a part of that industry to make a direct impact on bringing back a better scenario. Because bottom line, really, the stress continues to increase on both increasing the quality of care as well as driving down the cost in the supply chain of healthcare overall. And there's still a lot of unknowns, obviously, about healthcare reform, but we know that these two factors are not going to change. In fact, the pressure on them is only going to continue to increase as time goes on. And this is happening at a time when healthcare is starting to account for 20% of the overall U.S. economy, so it's a huge chunk of our economy. And it's at a time when Medicare and Medicaid is projected to reach insolvency by 2029, and that accounts for a huge part of our healthcare economy as well. So it doesn't seem sustainable, the path that we're on. The other trend that's really being identified here is that healthcare supply chain costs are expected or predicted to actually exceed labor costs as the #1 cost factor in healthcare in the next few years by 2020. So that's a huge opportunity, right? Because labor is really the most expensive cost driving healthcare right now, and supply chain is actually going to surpass that. So that means that's a role that we can definitely take on and address within our industry. And I think, as we take a step back and we look at healthcare overall, the next 5 years are actually pretty scary because as we continue to transition from a fee-for-service model into a value care-based model, the cuts that we're going to see in the Medicare fee-for-service payments are going to increase dramatically. And it's projected that over this 10-year period, we're going to see a cut of $415 billion in fee-for-service. So this means that healthcare organizations everywhere are expediting and trying to speed up ways to transition to a value care-based model from the fee-based model. So a few things that we're seeing in the industry that are driving this, we're seeing hospital consolidations. So, we're in Seattle, Providence and Ascension recently combined to consolidate. In the Midwest, we see Aurora and Advocate doing the same thing, and recently just announced Baylor Scott and White and Memorial Hermann are also combining. So we're seeing that across the board nationwide, and that's to try to leverage group buying power to drive costs down. The other thing we're seeing is that we're seeing that care is really being driven out of the acute setting and into the primary care setting, as well as, just to outpatient services in general to try to drive the cost down. So that's something we're seeing in the industry. And I think all of this points towards healthcare system wanting to move to that, being incentivized to move to that value-based care from the fee-for-service. So, as you can see here, when we look at some of the large IDNs, national accounts that are out there, industry trends are not going in the right direction. Expenses are continuing to rise, and net operating revenue is continuing to decline. And if we look at, a sobering fact is that hospitals that keep operating according to business as usual, and they don't make any changes to their supply chain or anything else at this point, they're going to be operating at a negative 15.8% margin by 2021. So that is not sustainable, and things have to change. So, the question really becomes, well, this is a huge issue. Obviously, it impacts a large amount of our economy. It impacts a really large industry with a lot of moving pieces. And what can we, as a portion of that industry, what can we do to impact change? I just threw a bunch of depressing news and statistics out there. So, the question is, what role can clinical engineering do? And I think a lot of it comes down to being really creative with our supply chain. And so that's what we're going to focus some attention on today. So, I think first of all, it's become obvious that we can't continue running things as they are. It's like, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If we're going to expect different results, it's going to require us to look at the same things in a different way. And that really requires being creative with our thought process. And instead of looking at healthcare as an industry in crisis, we look at it as an opportunity for us to make an impact. That trend towards streamlining and optimizing hospital supply chain affords us a unique role to be able to have a direct impact on leading that cost reduction and that increase in quality of care. So for me, the question is really, where can clinical engineering focus its energies and efforts most effectively? Because you have to narrow it down. You can't attack everything, right? So where can we get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of having that impact? And I think it's interesting to take a step back and look at the challenges that are facing healthcare as an industry overall and how they kind of play out in the microcosm of clinical engineering. Because the challenges that are really facing healthcare right now is identifying a wide variety of initiatives to execute on, achieve cost savings, and then document and track those cost savings. And that's one. And the second is really tracking a wide variety of quality metrics, because as we move to a value-based care model, hospitals are being incentivized on the quality of care that they're giving, right? And in clinical engineering, we see something very similar. Is we want to increase the quality of the service that we're providing. So how do we track metrics on that? And how do we ensure that we are moving the needle when it comes to quality? And then the third is, hospitals are really looking at optimizing their margin when revenue drops. And this is a refrain that's common in our industry as well, right? We need to do more with less, We need to do more with the same amount of resources we have and the same tools we have. We need to be more effective in that. So I think that one idea that we can look at is to really stop, put a pause on our business and reevaluate. Is this the direction we want to be going? Where do we need to be going? And what are our ideas to get there? The key to transitioning to this new value-based model for hospitals and healthcare out there is really threefold. They are looking at how to effectively manage shared service programs to maximize reimbursement. And I think this is really interesting to look at in the context of our industry as well, in clinical engineering, because we have gone out there and negotiated many different service contracts, procurement contracts, all of these things with different vendors and suppliers, but how often are we approaching them in a creative manner to say, how can we look at a shared savings model? How can we look at something that benefits both you and benefits me if we execute on it and we deliver results and we share in those results? So to me, that's an interesting concept. The second is improving operating costs to deliver care more effectively. So this is really critically looking at your supply chain and making sure that you're optimizing your operating costs, you're cutting out unnecessary waste. And then the third is increasing patient volume. And the way I think that this translates to our industry is that we want to be able to take on higher level, more complex work. We want to be able to service more equipment more effectively, and we want to make sure that our equipment is up and running faster. But we need to do that with the similar resources and tools that we have today. So how do we think about that creatively? So I think that the key here, if you take away one idea today, is to sit your team down and to really just open it up and say, what ideas do you have? Let them know that nothing is off the table and that you're open to hearing any and all ideas they have around the subject of cutting out cost and increasing quality in your supply chain and in the work that they do and the value that they bring to the organization every day. So the question that I like to ask when I sit down with groups and do this is, what would you do if you could start over? If you could just wipe the slate clean, what would you do as an organization, as a clinical engineering group? And when you sit down and you ask this question, you get some really insightful answers from the group. So I think that you can sit down and you can ask this question once, but you can ask this question day in and day out anytime someone brings an issue or a question to you. And it's one way to really stimulate the conversation to provide solutions to the questions that are out there. So when I ask this question of myself, the answer I come up with is, why not focus on supply chain? It's an obvious area of opportunity. This study came out of 2,300 hospitals, and they looked at the supply chain spend, and they found that providers could potentially reduce their annual supply chain budgets by a total of $23 billion. So that's overall 18%. That's a huge area of opportunity, right? It's an obvious area of opportunity, and it's one that we should all be looking at really closely and critically within our organizations. And when I step back and look at how do hospital administrators look at this, when they're looking at the overall supply chain for a healthcare organization, they are looking at a few different factors. They're trying to understand, what is the complete cost structure picture of my supply chain? And it's something that we should all be asking ourselves as clinical engineering leaders. What is our complete cost structure? What is my budget comprised of? What do I spend the most money on? And where do I spend money for little value? As I mentioned before, they're looking at succeeding in shared service arrangements. They're looking to automatically track quality measurements and set metrics. They're looking to improve performance, streamline operations, reduce waste, and improve margins. And these are all things that we should be looking at in clinical engineering as well. So I think our biggest opportunity as an industry is to really take this same approach and looking critically at our own supply chain. So I mentioned sitting down with the team and soliciting ideas from them. And I think it's really important to take a look at what are all the different perspectives that are within a clinical engineering supply chain team. So it's not just the technicians, it's not just the managers. It actually encompasses a lot more, because there's a lot more groups within the organization that you're probably working with on a daily basis that have an impact on the work you do, and you have an impact on the work that they do. So it's important to engage all the various stakeholders, because each stakeholder is going to have a different perspective. They're going to have a different approach. They might have slightly different goals, but in the end, they're all going to have great and creative ideas on how to drive costs down and quality up. When I look at the director level, there's usually a lot of focus on how to drive the overall cost of the program down, how to take on more service, and how to lower the total cost of service. From a supply chain perspective, they're really looking at how do we enforce standardization and compliance, and how do we manage the long tail spend. And this is an area that's been hard for them to get their hands around in clinical engineering because we have a lot of long tail spend. As many of you know, for instance, in the parts industry, sometimes you're buying a part once a year. Once every 2 years, you never buy that part again. You're going to some kind of unique and special supplier to get that part. So it's much harder to standardize compliance to a certain set of parts, for instance, than it is in other areas of healthcare. So how to think creatively about that. You know, finance is looking at the utilization of assets. Are we using our assets effectively? Are we driving down operational costs? Technicians are looking at how do I provide higher value work that I'm doing? How do I increase my productivity? How do I make sure that the things that I'm responsible for buying for the organization are at the lowest cost and the highest quality? So all of these different perspectives need to be taken into consideration. And I would encourage that if you do sit down with the team and ask, what could we do if we were going to start over, that you involve all these different stakeholders, and there's probably way more that I'm not even putting up here that are at your organization. But approaching it from a really collaborative perspective can benefit you immensely to bring new and creative ideas into the mix. So, you know, for the rest of our time this morning, I really want to focus on people, process, and technology, because I think that all three of those are really essential to achieving hard cost savings. They're essential to achieving soft cost savings and, you know, quality outcomes. And ultimately, it also allows us to showcase the value that clinical engineering brings to the organization, which I think is really important. If we're not tracking, measuring, and reporting out, it's almost like we're not doing it. So it's really important. So the first area that we're going to focus on is people. You know, in the clinical engineering industry, and I think in healthcare in general, people are our largest asset. They are, you know, without them, we don't have the proper resources to deliver care. We don't have the proper resources to keep medical equipment up and running, to provide preventative maintenance that keeps our equipment in optimal condition. And I think that we're finding that more and more within the industry, technicians, managers, directors, they're becoming trusted advisors to other entities within the hospital. You know, everyone from the frontline nursing staff all the way up to CFO and CEO of an organization. They're depending on clinical engineering to give valuable input on important capital purchases, on service delivery, on technical interfaces for equipment and, you know, medical systems, on special equipment projects. The list goes on, and I'm sure you all have many projects you're working on in your organization. But considering that wide range of responsibilities that a clinical engineering group has, the question has to be, where are we spending a lot of time for little value? And I think that's where we can really focus in on. So when you start to narrow down those activities that are sucking up the time, but you don't feel like you're getting a lot of value out of them, then you're able to really identify where to hone in on. And when I've completed this exercise in the past, and for instance, when I was at Alina and went through this exercise, those answers usually consist of anything that's not focused on the core competency of providing excellent service. That's what clinical engineering does well, and that's where the focus should be, is on providing excellent service and ultimately excellent patient care. So some of the examples of things that are time sucks in our industry that don't necessarily provide value to our organization is we spend a lot of time managing and administering service contracts. We spend a lot of time reconciling invoices, paperwork. We spend time sourcing parts. I mean, these are all examples of things that don't necessarily add a lot of value to the organization, but take up a lot of time for our people. So I think that there are many ways to leverage people in pursuit of lowering costs. One of them that I just want to point out is developing a strong relationship with supply chain and other key internal stakeholders in your organization. These relationships are absolutely essential to ensure that you have a seat at the table when it comes to making important decisions in the organization. that immediately the first thought is, oh, I need clinical engineering, I need healthcare technology management at the table in order to make this decision. So that's decisions on capital purchases and other important cost-saving initiatives. Our advice on the cost of service for certain types of equipment and vendors, the inclusion of in-house training when they're negotiating contracts, all of these things, trying to negotiate new types of service contracts that really tailor to the capabilities that your staff have, and even pushing vendors to create new and creative types of service offerings. All of these are things that can be done in conjunction with supply chain, with finance, with others in the organization. So you can also work with these internal groups to identify other companies out there to create strategic partnerships with that are going to help leverage where you want to go in the organization. And, I encourage to particularly focus on those that have large supply chains where you can add your purchasing volume to their volume and you can achieve, and realize the benefits of their strong buying power out in the marketplace. So it's a very similar model to GPOs that hospitals follow, right? But we can do it with other organizations out there as well in the industry. So the more strategic you can be in identifying types of equipment you can bring in-house for service, the better you can leverage your resources, and also in the same time provide staff with new opportunities and room for advancement. And you're doing all this while you're actually saving the organization money and time. So I wanted to give an example of an organization that PartsSource has been working with recently that's been looking at this with a critical eye and taking some steps to make some changes, and that's Mayo Clinic. So Mayo Clinic really wanted to take a step back and focus on what opportunities do we have to increase the productivity of our people. They wanted to free up time to take on installation projects, device cybersecurity, interoperability, implementations, and a lot of other system-wide projects that they were being asked to be a part of. So they knew they needed to take a look at where am I spending a lot of time for little value. And they found that for them that was in the parts procurement process. So they put a program in place. They selected a set number of preferred vendors to work with. And they basically stop clocked what their current pay to procure time was for parts. And they realized they were spending almost 89 minutes per order from the beginning of sourcing a part all the way through the invoice payment of a part, which is not atypical for our industry. When they looked at how they could streamline that and put some integrations in place and utilize technology, they actually got that parts procurement process down to 4 minutes per order. That actually saved their organization 31 hours per day across their entire health system. So it was a significant soft cost savings for them, and they were able to redeploy people across their organization. And while they did actually add staff as well, especially to support their cybersecurity program, it really created some flexibility in their organization to be able to redeploy people to higher level work, in essence. So the next area I wanted to focus on is process. And, there's two questions to ask here. I think it helps to identify who are your high spend vendors. So if you just look at your expense across the board, who are you spending the most money with? That's where you have the opportunity, right? Once you've identified those, it's helpful also to look at your quality rates. I think answering this question is a little more tricky because it's really difficult for clinical engineering groups to be tracking quality. It often becomes very anecdotal, right? Like, I don't use this vendor, I had a bad experience with them. But there's not a real quantitative way to be tracking that with the systems that we currently have. So once you've narrowed down who your high spend vendors are, it's easier to develop a strategy for cost containment. This could mean going back and renegotiating supplier contracts or finding alternative options that maintain quality at a lower price point. I think that a major consideration when you're looking at your supply chain and cutting costs out is vendor consolidation. So like the example that I mentioned with Mayo, when they did that critical look at who their high spend vendors were, what kind of quality results they were achieving out of that, they were able to narrow that set of preferred vendors down quite substantially. Because when you have hundreds or even thousands of different vendors or suppliers that you're using, that means hundreds or even thousands of different processes that you have for dispatching the work, for putting an order in, for paying an invoice. It becomes very complex very quickly. And as I mentioned previously, because we have such a long tail spend in our industry, it can have a real impact on the time that we end up spending on these things as well. So, looking for companies that can provide a wide range of services or suppliers for your organization, and better yet, companies that actually have a certified quality process in place that they can track and measure for you is key. And a lot of these companies that are out there, they can also give you access to industry benchmarking. So you can actually start looking at setting your internal metrics against industry benchmarks, which is really important to be able to actually track and report out on the way that your group is performing. I have seen very few clinical engineering groups that have the bandwidth or the resources to put a supplier vetting process in place. So that means that partnering with organizations and companies that can do that for you is really key to making sure that the service and the parts that you're providing and ultimately the patient care that you're helping to provide is going to be a quality outcome. So, did I go backwards? I think I did. All right. So I'm going to give an example that's near and dear to my heart for process, which is Allina Health. When I was at Allina, we were really focused on ways to find opportunities to consolidate suppliers and just achieve better pricing. That's ultimately also the outcome of consolidating vendors. And, we looked at also consolidating to a set of preferred vendors, which we did. And we ultimately consolidated over 450 suppliers down to a limited set, probably 10 or less, of suppliers that we utilized for parts procurement. And we were actually able to achieve a 98.1% quality acceptance rate on the parts we were purchasing. And we really had no idea what we were even benchmarking that against because it wasn't something that we were able to track previously as an organization. So we had a metric to track against, and we were able to see how we were performing against that metric going forward. We also were able to achieve a 27% hard cost savings across the board and reduce the pay to procure time by about a third by putting some technology in place. So, as I mentioned, this really allowed us to actively monitor quality, which was a huge initiative at the time that I was there. And we reduced that procure to pay time by 31%. So what ended up happening was we freed up some resources to do other work. We started asking technicians and technical leads to take on modality-specific projects across the system. And we also got involved in cybersecurity, much as Mayo had, and freed up some resources to work on that. So it really had a beneficial outcome, I think, for that organization. So the last area I want to touch on is technology. I think that by recognizing opportunities to use technology effectively, clinical engineering departments can actually automate a lot of processes that we do manually currently. Things like this include parts ordering, service dispatching, requisitions in the ERP system, invoice payment, and reconciliation, all of those areas that we talked about that nobody wants to spend time on, but we spend a lot of time on it. So how do we use technology to really appropriately?
Can you go over what ERP is?
Yes, an ERP is your purchasing system, so like Lawson or McKesson or PeopleSoft, it's where you issue your purchase requisitions out of.
Enterprise resource.
Yeah. It's basically the system you issue your POs out of or your purchase requisitions out of to get invoices cut and paid. So, there's a few different areas here that you can really look at. One is putting integrations in place. So, all clinical engineering groups have a CMMS, computerized maintenance management system. Is that what it stands for? Looking at ways that you can eliminate duplicate entry into the CMMS and other systems is really important. Looking at ways that you can automate the purchase requisition and purchase order process out of your ERP, and looking at ways to electronicize your invoice payment via EDI is another opportunity. Just giving your staff better tools. I think it also leads to job satisfaction, better job satisfaction when you give your staff better tools to do their work, and they feel like they're not spending time on things that aren't value adds to the organization. Another area is really that has a large impact that we've kind of like danced around but not really talked about is reporting and analytics. So the information that you enter or your staff enters into the CMMS, the data integrity that you have there is really key to being able to pull out good information to create analytics and metrics internally. But it's not always enough. As I mentioned, having industry benchmarks to be able to then set those internal metrics against is really, really helpful. And there's a lot of different organizations out in the industry that have access to that type of information that you can partner with. So it's one that's definitely key. Tracking and reporting on your spend, particularly as it pertains to service and parts, will better allow you to recognize spending patterns, to analyze that data, and make changes to save money. So a couple of examples of this that I've seen customers go after is they have looked at, for instance, where they have departments or staff that are calling out vendors for after-hours service, and it wasn't absolutely necessary. And what was the cost savings they could have achieved by not doing that? I think another example is where organizations have decided to standardize certain parts. They focused on batteries, bulbs, and cables maybe in the beginning, and they've looked at secondary options or OEM replacement options instead of buying OEM options to save money. And they've been able to partner with organizations that can show that the quality is consistently just as high on those items, but they don't have to go through the OEM for those, so there's significant cost savings in that area. So I think by tracking and reporting on all the work that your department does, it's going to both save the organization money, but then you also have a great story to tell the leadership team to be able to showcase that value that clinical engineering is bringing to the organization. So the last example that I wanted to go through is one in Colorado, UC Health. UC Health has 3 different regions that are spread across the Colorado area. And all 3 of those regions, while it was a centralized clinical engineering group, they had a really fragmented process for the way that they were procuring parts. Every group had their own process. They utilized their own vendors. They were all paying different price points for the same parts because they weren't looking at it in a centralized fashion. So when they took a step back and they thought about what kind of technology they could bring to bear on this process, they looked at their workflow. And they sat down and they sat with us and they process engineered their workflow. They looked at doing a punch out from their ERP system that really saved their technicians time when they were ordering parts, and they put that in place. And when they put that in place, it actually resulted in a 35% cost reduction in spend across their organization. So it was fairly significant. And I think one of the results that they probably weren't expecting, but they were really happy about, is that now they're able to effectively communicate, and they can also back each other up across the regions, because before some of them were purchasing on credit cards, some of them were using the ERP system. They all had different processes, and now any of them can step into a role in any of the regions and know exactly what the process is and how to execute on it. The other thing that they saw happen out of this process was it really cemented relationships across the various departments and sites. And that has meant that because they pulled supply chain and finance and other groups into this process when they were engineering what they wanted their ultimate workflow to look like, they created those relationships, and now it means they're being brought to the table in other conversations that they weren't a part of previously because they created those relationships. So that's been a really tangible outcome for them that they weren't expecting. So, just to wrap things up, I think it's really about creating a framework for success for your organization. It's about bringing all those different stakeholders to the table and coming up with a plan to execute on for how you want to drive cost out of your supply chain and how you want to increase the quality of what you're purchasing and the services that you're providing to your organization. It means ensuring that you have the right people, process, and technology in place to execute on that roadmap. It means partnering and consolidating with best-in-class organizations that will provide meaningful support to your team, freeing up their time to take on that higher level work and contribute directly to the cost reduction and higher quality care that your organization is giving. So it really means asking, if we could start over again, what are we going to do differently? How are we going to move forward? So, just a few key takeaways. I would really encourage you to think about people, process, and technology as it pertains to your organization and the value that you bring. I happen to think that two of the largest areas that we can have impact on are eliminating service contracts or drastically reducing them, finding creative ways to renegotiate them, and consolidating suppliers. And then always bringing a critical mind to the process, always coming back and asking, how can we do this better? And why can't we do this another way? So that's what I have. I wanted to open it up for questions, but also I'd love to hear thoughts and perspectives about what you're doing in your organizations to think about these problems creatively.
Yeah. One of the things that we've done is, it sounds like we're just offloading the clinical engineering team, FTE, with full-time equivalents, and doing a lot of ordering work and procurement. We moved it over to the procurement department with some education. And they have a lot more processes in place and were more skilled once they picked up some clinical engineering, understanding how to contact over there, so they were able to gain efficiency by moving it to a different department. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, I think. So you basically centralized your procurement process with the supply chain.
And because to have lab technicians working through that, obviously they communicate a lot about what they're doing and why. We had a couple of meetings on that, but their processes and procurement were much faster. So when they kept our people doing
yeah, that's a great example. Yes.
And we also started using our value analysis team in supply chain, and they handle the benchmarking and the vendor selection, and we do use GPOs, of course. But we also use MD Byline and HCRQ for our benchmarking techniques in order for us to do that. One of the biggest changes that we made was the first thing you said about bringing all of those people to the table. When you decide to purchase something, to vet it properly and to see how it's going to affect overall cost savings over the entire hospital system. We found that where clinical engineering thought that they were having a strong cost savings, they were hurting IT on the back end. Right. So the overall hospital was not really saving anything, they were losing money. So by bringing everybody to the table, we're seeing where it significantly gives a cost savings in one department, it might be hurt in another. But one of the other things that we found was we added in the recalls coordinator, which is in our hope, because we are doing a stronger quality vetting of the devices that we purchase. When you check the FDA mod event reports and whatnot, and you see a trend with a particular vendor and an item, it might not be a recall, but you can see significant device failures with a board always having to be repaired, but it was never recalled. But this gives you this warning: don't bring this device into your hospital because you're going to spend more on repairing it than what it actually costs. So bringing all those people to the table and actually looking into vetting the devices that you purchase better reduces the repair time and productivity time of your technicians, because now they're not fixing something that was a nightmare to buy. But yeah, it involves everybody, so we can provide that overall cost.
Yeah, that's a great one. Sure.
What were some of the metrics that you brought in to evaluate that with the benchmark?
So I guess I'll use the example of Elena when I was there, what we looked at. So we hadn't really been able to put any quality metrics in place because we just didn't have a good way to track that in terms of the parts procurement we were doing. So after we partnered with PartsSource, we were able to start looking at the reporting they provided. It told us exactly what parts we were returning, what were warranty exchanges versus DOA failures versus things that perhaps we misdiagnosed, systems that we misdiagnosed or parts that we ordered incorrectly. So we were able to split out between customer return reasons and vendor return reasons and understand what the true quality was that we were purchasing. And it allowed us to make more insightful decisions about who we purchased from, as opposed to just having anecdotal information around that.
So on that question, this is something that we tracked pretty closely, right? One of my past lives, and so the things that we looked at were the DOA rates, on-time delivery, wrong part delivery, and premature failures. And it's something that we tracked very, very closely and monitored. What's interesting is the perspective of the technician is that because you're so focused on quality, and there's an understanding that when you do have a wrong part delivery or DOA part delivery, you're essentially doing that repair twice, right? And it extends downtime. That's bad for everybody, right? With these metrics that we tracked, there were consistently two companies that always floated to the top of people you didn't want to buy from. One of them was an OEM. So, again, if you think that that's always the safest bet, that's not always the case, which holds up even more reason to track those metrics.
Yes.
I'm kind of an oddball there because I've been doing information security, cybersecurity for 22 years in hospital for about 12. And one of the things that I'm finding that you're not tracking, you need to track vendors, is cybersecurity compliance. I go through, and I've actually said no, because all Biomed devices have to go through me now, and they have to go with other vendors. Biomed devices are about 20 years behind other computers. We're tracking how well they meet our requirements. A lot of them have Windows devices now, uncatched. So it's a very serious thing for patient care now, and it needs to be in the procurement process. It needs to be tracked, and you need to figure that into how you're going to work that. And if anybody has questions on that, please.
Yeah, and in a similar vein, I think, to what we're talking about on the parts side or service side, there are organizations out there to partner with on some of these areas in cybersecurity, from device monitoring and proactive types of addressing of issues like that, where there's OS systems that aren't patched, et cetera. So it's not something that we have to go it alone on. There's obviously learning from each other in the industry, but there's also organizations out there to partner with.
It requires multiple departments to work together. It's not one time.
Yes.
One of the things I want to call out as well, you talked about the importance of connecting with supply chain and helping to not only narrow down the vendors that you're working with, but to help with negotiations. The thing I've always talked about, and we employ this in two different organizations that I worked in, is where do you have all of your leverage for negotiation? It's when you still have those capital dollars in hand, right? So it's vitally important that in connecting with your supply chain that you negotiate discounts on parts, discounts on T&M labor, service contracts, all of that, while you still have those capital dollars in hand, right? To make the purchase and then try to negotiate those things after the fact. Good luck with that.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you can't do it, but the amount of leverage that you have is great.
It becomes an uphill battle once the piece is actually bought and a PO is cut.
Well, right, and especially if you're doing, like you said, working towards standardization with particular vendors, that's the time that you can start putting together like combined purchase and services agreements where you've got all of those things outlined in a master agreement.
Yeah. And I really encourage people to think about it in terms of stages too, like what's your 3 to 5 year plan on any particular modality of equipment, because you might not be ready to bring CT or MR in-house today, but you might have a plan to get there in 3 to 5 years. And when you purchase that piece of equipment, are you thinking about that? Are you negotiating in some free training classes for your technicians? Are you making sure that your contracts that you sign on the service side are easily changeable or switchable if you decide to decrease the level of service or eliminate them completely? Just making sure that you're building flexibility into those agreements and that you're thinking about them in a creative fashion and you're thinking about them in terms of the long term is really important.
So what kind of things did you look at for when you were at a line item? Go back to that line for identifying or making stocking decisions, right? On what things to stock to get to a just in time rather than a just in case type of a scenario, right?
Right.
So not only determining what to stock, but how to set those power levels. Interested in how you went about doing that.
Yes, it's a great question because I think there's a fine balance, right? You definitely don't want to just stock things for just in case. You want to stock things that you're actually going to use, and you want to make sure that the turns on them are very swift. So it's interesting because I think it goes back to the reporting question of where are you pulling your data from and where are you getting that reporting from and how are you putting it together. So for us, part of the reporting that PartsSource provided to us was it looked at our historical purchases on things, and they actually made recommendations to us on what to stock based on historical patterns. They said, we see you buy this SKU at least consistently every month for different sites that you have. If you actually made a bulk purchase at the beginning of a quarter and stock that for the quarter, it's going to save you X amount of money, both on shipping and on the actual parts procurement of that particular part, because we can negotiate a lower price for a bulk buy. So we partnered with an organization to do that. I think you could do it internally as well. It just, we found that as part of our strategic program we had, they were able to provide that data to us for that.
One of the advantages that I learned from having that done in-house is one additional piece is if your technicians are requesting something that delivered overnight, when do they install it, right? And you have that visibility if you're doing it internally. And then if you find that you've got particular people that are ordering everything that they buy next day, again, just in case, but not installing it until a week later, well, that costs money, right? And so you can go back and have some crucial conversations around this.
Yeah, that was another metric we tracked was particularly overnight Biomed orders and overnight Biomed orders that had a line item level of 5 or more, because those are probably for stock. And why are they overnight in stock orders? Like, it doesn't make sense. If you need one for the next day, okay, then overnight one. But the other 4 shouldn't be going overnight. So there's a lot of granularity and detail that you can get into where you can really start to hone in on how do I drive down shipping costs and how do I drive down the overall cost of parts.
I think it was, sorry for my.
Any other thoughts or things that you're tackling in your organizations in terms of cost containment? Yeah.
So, does PartsSource track parts based on the OEM part number, or how are you reconciling those two things?
Yeah, we do a lot of cross-reference part numbers, so pretty much any cross-reference number that's out there is linked in our catalog. So it's got the OEM number. If there's a secondary option available for that part, it's going to cross-reference with the OEM number.
So if getting a contract with PartsSource, is your catalog like fairly expansive with that then? So like if we said we want your whole catalog, you'd be able to give us the 90,000 lines.
Yeah, you have, everyone in this room has access to the catalog right now. They can create an account. We have 4 million SKUs in the catalog, so it's pretty expansive. We also have a quote process, so if you don't find something in the catalog, you can just ask us to go out and source it for you, and we'll come back with all the different options that are available in the market. So, yeah, it's pretty expansive. There's also a mobile app that technicians can download, and it's pretty easy to use. So if they're out and on the floor and on the go, they can take a look and see if we have what they need.
And then are you ISO 9001 compliant?
We are. We're ISO 9001 compliant, correct. Yeah, it's that was something that for me as a customer was really beneficial. Was just I think I mentioned it when I was talking, was I just didn't feel like I had a good handle around quality. I could manually track how many times we returned a part, but beyond that, it was difficult. It was time consuming to do that. So to partner with an organization that vetted suppliers, that actually went out and did audits on site at the supplier site, issued corrective actions to them, and made sure that they were maintaining quality, that was big for me, because that meant then that I could say with a fair level of confidence that the parts I was getting were quality parts.
I'm not familiar enough with your catalog. Do you include radiographic parts, including detectors? And so, can you track in the portal? Because the detector has to be running, and the testing of that would take enough time that it would be advantageous to be able to track where in the quality assurance it is once it's ordered. So I'm curious if you have that visibility in your portal.
With detectors specifically, usually we're going to go out and do research for you on exact specs of that detector and exactly what, like especially if it's a secondary item or a refurbished item, we're going to give you all the detail behind that. It's not necessarily going to be in the catalog, but you're going to have someone that's going to directly contact you with all that information. So.
Do you upload the reports, the QA reports?
Not the catalog per se, I don't think.
Or I don't know with the portal with that.
Yeah.
Allows
I don't know. I'd have to look at that offline for you. I'm not sure the answer to that.
When you do source something that isn't in the catalog, after you source it, do you add it to the catalog?
Yeah, so we run algorithms to determine what makes sense to add to the catalog.
Sure.
Yeah, and we definitely are adding things every single day.
Do that, and based on customer request, where it makes sense. There's something specifically in this level that makes sense.
Generally, we just want to make sure there's a consistent supply chain on it and a consistent price we can get it at, and then we'll add it to the catalog. Those are kind of the two factors. You don't want to add something to the catalog that isn't available on a regular basis. It's better than to just go out and see what the options are at the time of purchase.
So did you guys take control and you guys monitor the recalls on the items in your catalog?
Our quality group monitors recalls for parts, and they will proactively work with our supply chain to address any part recalls that come about. I mean, I would assume in your position you're looking more at the device recalls rather than the parts recalls, but yes, we monitor our supply chain
We look at devices
and parts too?
Yeah, I do the entire gambit for the industry.
Yeah.
But just looking at them to make sure that nothing's going on. But one of the things we found is that when we have a contract out with the supplier and item comes up on recall, of course they can't sell it while it's on recall, but it sits illegal, the contract sits illegal, accumulating fees and costs. Mm-hmm. And when it's on recall, we try to get them to pull it out, until the recall can be remediated so that they're not stuck paying those general counsel fees while they're remediated.
Right. Yeah, we very proactively monitor our supply chain for any recalls. We pull them out of the catalog if we need to and ensure that we don't sell those parts if they're under recall. Yes?
Just one comment is something that you brought up earlier about using reliability data to help drive better purchasing decisions. Yes. I work for Accruent, and we have between TMS, Asset Enterprise, and Connective, 55% of the CMS market, so we have access to a lot of data. Bringing that type of data to bear for this group, you guys find value in having that? We've got a big data initiative underway to be able to provide that, which is a bit different than what you might get from like MD Byline or Equity, because it's real service data. Right?
So how are you categorizing if it's actually a where at issue, not a user issue?
Yeah, so it's filtered by repair codes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, even as a non-supplier, I would love to be able to do that data.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that anywhere that we can come together as an industry to create better benchmarking is key to being able to drive our business forward. If you don't have data to be able to tell you where you need to improve, then it's very difficult to improve. So
we struggle with that a little bit in our industry now.
Yeah, we have. I think there's been a lot of initiatives to do that, but nothing so far, nothing real comprehensive has been in place. So exciting to hear that there's those kind of initiatives underway. Any other thoughts or projects that folks are working on at your organizations? What are you concerned with?
Level of staff, maybe doing maintenance stuff. It's very, very serious.
Staffing levels? Yeah, we're in a time point, as we talked about with just the state of healthcare, where adding resources is not an option for a lot of organizations.
I think when someone dies from cybersecurity, which will and people, then they realize it's directly impacting security. I mean, unfortunately. Oh, I could give you a whole. If you guys want to look up something interesting, go to TrapX, and they have a paper on how hackers hack, and they've shown the concept of crash lab systems to get into CT machines, get into ventilator pumps, change the symmetry levels, etc. It's a matter of time before when you hook them up to the EMR, then they're going to be targeted attacks. And you think it's not going to happen, you'll see it in 2 years and everything. Within 2 years, you'll probably see it.
Yeah, it just points towards it becoming even more vital to try to free up resources so you can either reallocate or you can redistribute if you need to hire a different type of resource. Are others experiencing that with the staffing crunch? It's hard to add resources in your organization?
Hard to get quality technicians and engineers. That's just for the amount of medical centers out there and part suppliers and like just the vastness of healthcare and technical experts in maintain resolve issues for clinicians is a struggle. I'm trying to retain them, keep them. It's never changing. Now you've got cybersecurity, so you've got some technicians that are getting working 30, 40 years, taking on a whole new concepts that is really difficult in some cases.
Yeah, are you finding that what I'm finding is to work with cybersecurity, I have to work with my Windows team, which are IT, and clinicians. Because clinicians do not want to touch Windows, they've been trained. And then Windows do not want to check FDA medical device. But note that in the 2016 cybersecurity release from the FDA, they will allow without FDA changes things for cybersecurity. That you're going to find that who doesn't, and how do these different organizations work together? That's going to require some process and organizational change as IT and they just Biomed devices are not computers.
Oh sure, no, it's really tracking that is probably going to be the hardest part that we have because our CMSs might not be robust enough to actually track all the key fields to know the patching level, to know the patching regimen. Is the patching of a device really a PM? And if you do patch it, is that 100%? If you start to schedule that, you have to hit that at your 100% level.
And the vendor will say you can't do it. So we're planning on having to partner real directly with vendors, and I have the requirements out there for the contract signed, just like you said. And it's very, very difficult. And, that's one reason I'm here trying to learn clinical engineering and hear you folks talk. Because it's just really a struggle for me and like you could see it from your perspective.
Well, I mean, you've got the security posture of just the basic email, your enterprise, like just Word documents and that. That's one thing you can make that standard. But then you have medical equipment where you're correct. Some of it's, hopefully we're not on XP anymore, but some of it is still running XP. And so the security posture for that. And if it's you have to hold it off your you have to segregate it on the network. And that might be the best clinical. device to do that case.
But they still have remote
clinicians know
access.
about
The
it.
vendors need to get in remotely, so there's always push to it. Anyway.
Well, oh yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely, you know, it's not as homogeneous as, you know, the normal IT. Each vendor does it a little differently, and there's financial gains for them to do it a little differently. So, you know, more vendors are working together to kind of come with that, but it's it really requires the medical centers to say we want network security in our technology, and we're not going to buy from you unless you need this. And
the OIG is auditing manufacturers. They just started that for biomedical device security. This is new. And they just came out, there's something called an MDS2 form, if you don't know what that is. And a new one just came out, and it's went from something like 88 questions to like 200 requirements for manufacturers. A manufacturer disclosure statement of medical device security, which I use as the baseline. And then I find that the installers don't follow it.
sure, and it's a balance. The clinicians want a device that works, and they don't want to log in. They don't want to wait 5 minutes to log in. And so the medical center is going, all right, the clinicians want this, and they want speed. We want safety because now it's networking, and there's this risk. But healthcare leadership doesn't realize the risk. You know,
Yeah, that's what I do for a living. And essentially, if it's compensating controls, if it's in a protected area, do they have audit? Well, auditing doesn't help if it's a generic ID. But we do have to weigh that every day. So when the auditor comes in, this is where we did it. We've looked at the work process. This is what the patient care impact is if they have to log in. And we do have places where they don't. But we put other controls on it as much as possible. But we have to weigh that. Security is ultimately a patient care decision, a business decision. And I just say these are the risks, and the management, like you said, management has to make that decision, and it's really hard until they get educated about what's going to happen.
Yeah, this is it's really new territory for clinical engineering, right? It's to your point, it's not something that we've asked technicians to be directly involved with in the past. It's a new skill set. It's a new type of learning, and so we have to figure out how to partner with others in our organization to do it effectively and share learning across the board. So.
Can I ask, who are the people that put together your risk memo? And what we found in the VA is that based on the system owner, the individuals that put together the document can change. So I'm wondering if you guys have a standardized.
Yeah, we use the NIST framework. We received VA documents, and I met for management refused to sign it because they said we don't want a VPN anymore because of security requirements. You know, I'm telling you that we probably can't meet
What
it.
organization do you work with?
I'm not telling you. but no, I work for Asante, and we have a huge surprise. You know, I started as the only person, and I do the risk assessments, and I have both the MDS2 form, list what the vendor says they have, and then I do a post-install, and then I have it written up as far as these are business benefits or business operations or and patient things, and then we have to make that way. If I say these are the vulnerabilities, patching, antivirus, default vendor ID, these are the risks. This is what it should be. So I'm using the NIST risk assessment format. I've seen your document. It's excellent. I would like to send that out to everybody.
I don't think we're holding it in secret.
No, but everybody should have it. It's very thorough. What I think is funny is the VA and the feds have some of the worst security out there, as you can see from the grades that they're getting. And so that's where we're kind of laughing at it. But, we can't name them all either. So, the OIG results of the agencies, it's hard.
Yes.
I just want to comment on that. I think MDS2 is a good starting point, right, for identifying vulnerabilities, but we really need to get to a point where we're actually proactively monitoring network traffic.
It's not a one-time deal. And what the MDS says that they're going to do, I go and look at post-install. I have to show up in installations.
Right.
The technicians have not been trained to put this in, and my technicians, I said, I want it in preventative maintenance. Has it changed? I'm like, we don't have the people to do that. So I have a Biomed thing like Zoombox who's here to ongoing monitor. It's an ongoing process, and the risk and vulnerabilities change constantly. And now, like with Da Vinci system, we have people in open, that thing's on the network and it's tied to the EMR.
And if anybody is unfamiliar with those monitoring tools, what it does is it creates a profile for that device and what normal traffic is. And then if it sees anything outside of that norm, it'll isolate that device from the network and notify somebody. So, I mean, it just makes this whole...
But we haven't but which ones we can do that? We don't want to quarantine them without seeing what's going on. It's very complex. But yeah, there's a lot of there are a lot of monitoring of what IT, and then you can start measuring what vendors we're having trouble with. I want to get that, just like you're saying, as part of, I'm getting it written in the contract that you have to meet our security requirements on an ongoing basis and partner with us. And we're going to measure the performance and the compliance ongoing so that when you're up for renewal, this is one thing we look at, as well as everything else that she measured here that needs to be included in the checklist.
Yeah, it's definitely a great point. And I think cybersecurity in general, you have to look at it under the auspices of the entire life cycle of a piece of equipment, right? You look at it when you're making the purchase, and are you making the right purchase for your organization in terms of clinical use as well as security and cost effectiveness. And like you mentioned, it's one of those factors that you make when you're making a capital purchase, right? But then once it's in the organization and in the door and installed, how are you monitoring it? How are you ensuring that it is compliant and it's safe to have on the network and safe to provide patient care with? And then at the end of the life cycle, how do you dispose of it? How do you remove the PHI? How do you ensure that when you're disposing of that unit, that you're doing it in a way that protects the security of your patients and your organization? So it's a complete life cycle of events, I think, that has to happen. So
it's unfortunate something bad has to happen before deaf ears are open, right?
Someone has to die.
And yeah,
That's
so one cry.
That we unknowingly know, though. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the report, like, it doesn't get reported, so therefore we're not really too sure if it was because of blood failure or not.
Oh, you can tell, because they changed it. They get, like Dick Cheney won't wear his pacemaker because it's been proved of concept that you can zap someone's pacemaker. And as integrated as Biomed devices become personal area networks and become integrated in the person, it's life or death. And we've seen hackers in systems. We've watched how someone clicks an email. People use the same computer for accessing Biomed devices. If it's on the network, they click a fish, and then they're in, and they have an antivirus that looks like a new one, so the antivirus, or an old one, so the antivirus ignores it. It has inside of it a payload. They can go in and they can into all the systems. And they can change, they have complete control of it. They can change it, they can adjust it, they can change doses.
well, I want to thank everybody for joining me this morning. My contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If you want to talk supply chain, clinical engineering, more than happy to. And thank you all. Please make sure you fill out your survey.